My hands keep fidgeting with the little trinket from beneath the table. 3 little balls attached to a irregular, flat little shape loose enough that you can roll and twirl the spheres around, but not enough to remove them. The tiny object had no proper function whatsoever other than keeping my hands busy, and in turn it kept me calmer. Or at least I convinced myself it did. The Reverend places a tray with cookies and juice down and takes a seat across from me, the dark table standing between us. The smallest of barriers. My eyes keep flickering around and catching little details of the room. I gulp. "So," he says, flashing me a small smile, "what has been troubling you?" "Something is going around wearing my sister's skin." My sister Melody and I had always been very close. Despite the fact we weren't twins, by some trick of genetics we still looked uncannily alike, up to the point where, if we wore similar clothes, people would mistake one of us for the other. We liked the same kind of music, the same foods, the same games. My childhood was filled with the two of us running in the woods that faced the back of our house, climbing trees and chasing squirrels, giggling while the splotchy sunlight that flickered through the treetops painted us with a camo pattern. That changed around the time I was 13. During one of our outings, Melody fell off a tree. The branch she'd been hanging from broke, and she slid to the ground, and then beyond it, when the soil gave in, and she sunk into some large pothole that had been obscured by the tree roots. She screamed as she fell, her voice panicked and strange coming from that natural air pocket, and I screamed back as I flattened myself against the earth trying to get her back. I tried to reach out, lying belly down and stretching my arms into the hole as far as I could reach. I could touch her with my fingertips, but not enough to get a grip on her and pull her out. I didn't really get to talk of it since then. I tried to, just once. My mother shushed me, that it was fine, the scary part had ended, and what mattered was we were both home and fine, and just let it go. When I told her Melody wasn't fine, she backhanded me. "Don't talk back at me," she said. "And apologize to your sister." I didn't mention it again. My sister changed since then. She liked things she used to hate, she hummed songs with strange words, and claimed they were old favorites. And the biggest change of all, she hated meal times. Food was bland to her, and she hated it. Any food of any kind at all. Our parents said it was normal. She just didn't want to get fat. Puberty, and all that. That little age gap between us was finally showing its mark, and it was normal that Melody started having different interests and spending time with other people, while I stayed home with my trinkets and books. When she started setting her eyes on some edgy peeps around, it was normal. When she started coming home late, long after the sun went down and the streets were dark, it was normal. And when those people hadn't ever come back to their own homes the following morning, well, it was a tragedy. But that's all. There are evil people in the world, and those things happen when you live in a town such as ours. It was nothing to do with Melody. Our parents were just happy she came home. They never believed me when I said she didn't. They weren't there when she fell, like I was. They didn't hear how her scream cut off when she landed, or the way she lied in there, limp and with limbs splayed at odd angles. They didn't watch her wide eyes slowly turn milky, or feel her skin growing cold under my fingertips as the hours passed. They didn't see her dead, stuck in that cage of roots and moss. They also weren't there when I came home alone. Or when hours later I saw the shadow of my sister shambling towards the porch, motion strange and rigid like a puppet with tangled strings. So of course they never believed the thing walking around wearing my sister's skin is not, in fact, my sister. You think I'm crazy, don't you, Father? I ask at the end of my tale, waiting for the man in front of me to answer. The Reverend looked at me, and a troubled expression was added to his earlier smile. "I think you may need help, child." Giving credit where credit is due, at least he listened to me until I finished speaking, and looked me in the eye the whole time, which was more than I got from my mother. And he was physically present, which was more than I expected from my father. He gestured towards the tray of snacks as a sort of peace offering, and I did free a hand from my fidget toy beneath the table to take a cookie, though I elected to just hold and stare at it instead of eating. I'm not sure the kind of help I offer here is the right fit for you. If what you want is a warm room to spend the night and some supper, then yes, but you don't really believe me, I stated. That part, however, is exactly as I expected from him. I shrugged. Poor little thing, so young and delusional. That's what you're thinking. Even if I told anyone else, they wouldn't believe me. I sigh. Just like the boy who escaped your basement. Who would believe him? The Reverend stiffened on his seat. I eyed the door behind him, the one that led to the front nave of the chapel, and that we had used to reach this room, so that we could talk with more privacy. It was locked. But it didn't really matter. Well, I did. I say, standing from my chair at the same time as him. And Melody did too. He didn't have any chances to get close to me before her hands grasped his shoulders from behind and her teeth sunk in. I elected to turn away from him instead of watching, placing my fidget toy back in my pocket and standing by the window, eyeing the cookie against the sunlight and trying to decide whether it was drugged or not. The gurgling noises at my back were ruining my appetite though. As silent as Melody tends to be nowadays, her victims are not. I tossed the suspicious cookie aside. Anyway, if Melody is here, then the children must have fled already. The ones that still could move, at least. From there on, it was up to them to call their parents or anyone else, and let the authorities find the ones who were still down there. Be it to rescue or to bury. I wanted to go check on them, but the very thought of going down there myself made my stomach churn. I hate these weak guts of mine. If it wasn't for that, I'd be the one releasing the kids and Melody would have come straight here. But no use in fretting over that now. Mallory, I'm done. My sister's voice chirped. I'll grant this much to my parents, as long as she's kept properly fed. Melody does look normal on a first glance. Warm, solid, alive. Too bad her strict diet of wicked souls ruins the disguise and forces us to keep skipping towns before supply gets lower than demand. I glanced back at the Reverend as we made our way out of the room. Melody had sat him back on the same chair he'd been using before, and that's how anyone would find him later. His hair was tousled, and he looked pale and unkempt, but not a speck of blood or injury was in sight. He just sat as he was placed, as dead as one could be. He still gave me the creeps nonetheless. Your acting is getting impressive, Mal. It really looked like you were terrified. I wasn't acting. I sneered. What he did to those kids, and I had to distract the sick freak for, what, a full hour? 2. I was sweating buckets here. Weren't you anxious too? Oh, yes. I couldn't stop salivating. Melody's face has a dreamy, hungry expression to it, as if just the thought makes her yearn for another bite of her recent meal. I sighed. Why did I even ask?